Hi, everyone. Welcome to Craftsy Live Chats. My name is Ellie Lum, and I run a brand called Clumhouse Bag Patterns and Kits. So you might have seen my classes on Craftsy, the Fremont Tote, and the Woodland Dop Kit, and I love working with leather and hardware and waxed canvas. So I wanted to jump on today and just talk a little bit about hardware and answer anyone's questions about hardware and do some hardware demonstrations. Hardware is one of those things that makes a bag look so finished and so professional. So it's really fun to take your sewing skills and marry them to your hardware skills and really make a handcrafted good that looks like it's store-bought. And I feel like hardware really takes your projects to the next level. So I'm really excited to share any hardware knowledge that I have today. There are a million different types of hardware and ways to make bags, and I definitely don't know them all, but whatever hardware I'm familiar with or techniques that I'm familiar with, I'm totally happy to share all of that. And if you all like some of the tools and things that I'm using today, they're all available on our website at clumhouse.com, and that's KLUMHOUSE.com. And let's get started. I'm going to head to chat and see what everybody wants to know about. Okay, so we'll start with rivets and different types of rivets and how to install them. And someone is asking about lining on a leather bag, which isn't quite hardware, but if we can get to that, I'm sure. Oh, great. And magnetic snaps and I guess the difference between good hardware and not good hardware, which totally, there's actually two different kinds of magnetic snaps. There's a magnetic snap rivet and magnetic snaps. So we can look at the difference there. I'm going to start actually with rivets, and there's two different kinds of rivets that I like to work with. And they're set in two different ways. So let's look at the differences between those two types of rivets, why you might use one over the other, and how you set one and then the other. The most common type of rivet that you're probably familiar with is a double cap rivet. And it sounds just like the name. It has two sides, two pieces. And I'm going to go ahead and push this down so you guys can see. So this is a double cap rivet, and here's the cap on one side, and there's the other cap there, right? And so when you set a double cap rivet, it looks like this. You could see the cap on one side, and you could see the cap on the other. So it's got a finished look on both sides. So that's a double cap rivet. The other kind of rivet that I like to work with is called a tubular rivet, and it only has one piece. And on the stem side, it's got a hole in the middle, and that's a tube. And so this is what a tubular rivet looks like, and it's a little stronger of a hold than a double cap. And this is what the back of a tubular rivet looks like when it's set. And this is what the front looks like. So you get that finished look on the front, and then you get that star shape on the back. So this is a stronger hold in a lot of ways than a double cap rivet, but it doesn't have the nice finished look of a double cap rivet. Okay. And you can set a double cap rivet with just a hammer, whereas you need a tubular rivet peening tool to set a tubular rivet. So let's go ahead and look at those two differences. First off, when you're setting a double cap rivet, like the ones that I set on this zipper pouch here, you can set them to attach like a name tag to your project, or you could set them to attach like a buckle or D-rings or even a leather zipper pull. And they're just like really easy to work with and super versatile. So we use them all the time, and you probably see them on a lot of sewing projects. And the first thing you need to do to set a double cap rivet is you need a piece of leather that has holes in it for the rivet to go through. And you also need to put holes in your fabric. Okay. And there's two different ways to put holes in your fabric and in your leather for that matter. One is with a rotary punch, and the second is with a drive punch and a mallet. Okay, and if you use a drive punch and a mallet, you also need a cutting board. Okay, so let me show you that. So these three things go together: drive punch, mallet, cutting board, in order to make holes in your fabric or holes in your leather. Basically, drive punches come in a bunch of different sizes, and this is an 1/8 inch drive punch, which we'll use a lot of time to make holes in leather. And then the rotary punch just has a bunch of different sizes of drive punches on it, right? So the 1/8 inch drive punch size is the second smallest hole on this rotary punch that we sell on our site. So it's just two different ways to make holes. If you're using a rotary punch, you literally just squeeze it onto your fabric and then you get a hole. Well, my rotary punch is just a little bit dull, so my hole like kind of halfway cut. And I can push the rest. I can push my rivet through, and it still didn't do it. So I basically just like grabbed one that was kind of dull, which happens a lot in my studio because I have a teaching studio. So all of my tools get so much wear and tear. So I just went ahead and pushed it in there again and got the hole. The other way to make a hole is with the drive punch, cutting board, and a mallet. And then I'm just going to go ahead and strike this by holding this drive punch vertical and using a mallet here, but I'm going to turn my volume down so you guys don't get like a super loud noise. So 1 second. And that also made a hole. So you need a hole in your leather and you need a hole in your fabric in order to set a rivet. So then I'm just going to take my double cap rivet with a stem and stick it into my leather piece. And then I'm going to stick that into my piece of fabric. And then if I want, I can do one of two things. I can put a washer on the back of the fabric, and that just makes it so that it's a little bit stronger if I'm going to be pulling on this a lot. So if I'm pulling a lot on this strap for whatever reason, like it's a tote strap and it's going to carry all my stuff, then I probably want to sandwich my fabric in between two pieces of leather in order to set it. And then I'm going to click the cap on, but that's not set yet until I hammer it. And the key here for setting this is use a hard surface. So this is a cutting board. It is not considered a hard surface. So I'll usually go to the ground, or I'll use my piece of stone here. So this is a great hard surface. And there's two different ways to set this too. You can just use a regular hammer and hammer this rivet down so it sets, or you could use a rivet setter, which has a little concave end on it, and it preserves the roundness of the rivet. If you want to set it with that, you would use a mallet, right? But the key to setting any rivet is to make sure that your rivet is on a flat surface. And also, when you go to set it, that you're actually hitting it straight on and not crooked, right? And then the other thing is we're going to start with light hits and go to medium hits. And then our last few hits will be kind of hard. But you don't want to go in super hard at first, because then you go and kick the rivet to the side and it doesn't set straight. So I'm going to go ahead and mute and set this with the hammer and show you. So you can tell that this is set because you can see that the rivet has dented into the leather slightly. So that's a nicely set rivet, okay? So if we want to set a double cap rivet with a rivet setter, I'll go ahead and show you that. So let me make a hole in this side of the fabric. So now I have a hole, and I'm going to grab another double cap rivet, stick it through my leather and my fabric. And now I'm actually going to show you this one without the leather washer. Okay, so is this the correct surface? No, we need a piece of stone, the ground, or some other hard surface. And then I'm just going to go ahead and take my rivet setter, make sure I'm on the concave end, hold it vertically aligned on top of my rivet. I'm going to mute so I can hit this, and then I'm going to use my mallet instead of the hammer. So I don't know if you could tell the differences there. This one's more flat and this one's more round. And this is the one that I set with the rivet setter. Okay, so let's see if anyone has any questions there about double cap rivets. Let me know if that was clear or if you want to see more about that. Okay, Elizabeth, you want to know help on closures on bags and how to attach them. I'm wondering what type of closure in particular you're asking about. And Bray, I don't know what biothane strapping is. I'm sorry, I've never worked with it. Is it possible something about the rotary punch, Melanie? I'm not quite sure what that means. Okay, so Kate, we have both caps for tubular rivets and also washers for the back with a rolled instead of a split star. Correct. Yes, so tubular rivets do have caps. If you want, you can purchase them to set with your tubular rivets. However, it does require a little extra level of skill to get that cap to set correctly on top of the back side of the tubular rivet. And in my experience, the best way to do that is to actually use an industrial hand press to set that cap with a tubular rivet. Otherwise, I would suggest just leaving it open with the star shape and just using the hand tool for the tubular rivet. Oh, thanks, Dorothy. That's a great question. How do you know what size rivet to use? Okay, so let's look at the rivet here. I'm just going to pull my camera a little bit closer. So a rivet comes with, there's a post, right? And then there's the cap or whatever. So let's just focus on the side with the post because that's the question at hand. When you're setting a rivet into fabric, you want the rivet stem to extend at least a 1/16 of an inch to an 1/8 of an inch above the bulk of your work. So for instance, I just put 2 pieces of leather here to demonstrate that. See how you could see a little bit of the cap coming up? That's a good amount for it to extend above, and then you would set that. You know, there's a little flexibility there. Like if for some reason I really wanted to get this thickness and I only had a certain rivet size, I probably could set that, but it wouldn't be as strong. Because when a rivet sets, what you want to do is you want the end of the rivet post to actually mushroom over and sort of smash into the cap, which you can't see when you're setting it. So if you have too much stem sticking up, like this is more than a 1/16 to an 1/8, then this rivet will set crooked very easily. But if you have enough of the rivet taken up in the stem with the thickness of your work, whatever that might be, fabric, leather, and you have about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch of the rivet post sticking up, then you will get, it will be easier to set straight, and it will set stronger because you'll have enough of the rivet post to sort of like mushroom over and smash and get stuck inside of the cap. And that is the same rule with tubular rivets also. Okay, So you want enough of that sticking up above the bulk of your work. So like this tubular rivet has a stem that's longer than this double cap rivet. I don't know if y'all can tell on screen about that. So this tubular rivet can handle a thicker amount of stuff to set it. So there's about a 1/16 of an inch sticking up there. So I could go ahead and set that, which I will right now to show you how to set that with a peening tool. So I want to be on a hard surface. And then I want to have the side of the tubular rivet facing up, that's the tube. And I'm going to put the peening tool in there. So you could see the peening tool has like a little bit of a star shape there. And then I'm going to use my mallet to hit that. And I'm going to use the same principle that we did last time, where I'm going to start with a lighter to medium hits. And then I'm going to go and hit a little bit harder. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mute us here. So you could see there that it went into like a star shape. And then it's indented into the leather. So this is going to be a really strong hold right there. Okay. How do you know what size rivet? Okay, so we talked about that. How heavy fabric should be used on rivets, or do you need leather? No, you can use you could even use like a cotton, as long as you're sandwiching the fabric between two pieces of leather. Then this is going to protect the fabric hole from getting too big and from your rivet for tearing out, right? So you want to if you're using thinner fabric, you definitely want to sandwich your rivet in your fabric into two pieces of leather when you set the rivet. Oh, Betty, that's a great question. How do you remove a rivet? We actually manufacture a rivet removal tool, which I absolutely love using. It's one of my favorite tools. So I'll go ahead and show you how that works. Oh, let me go grab that one piece of it. Hold on. Okay, so this is a rivet removal tool. I have an instructional video there, which I'll show you. So it comes with these two parts, and here's a rivet that I'll remove with it. So one of the most important things is to work on a cutting board. So what I'll do is first find the hole on the rivet removal tool here that corresponds best with the size of the rivet cap. So that to me is this second hole. And I'm just going to line that up there. Okay, and then I'm going to lay that down on my cutting board. And I'm going to mute us here. Well, first, this little pointy thing, the pin punch, is going to just go to the center of the rivet here. And I'm going to hold it with downwards pressure. And then I'm going to go ahead and strike it with the mallet. And what that does is it pushes the rivet out. So it punches a hole into the rivet. And I just like took it off here, see? And then it just falls right out. So to me, that's the easiest way to remove a rivet. Now, if you don't have a rivet removal tool, or if you don't want to get one on our site, then you can use pliers and angle cutters. But I would suggest, and then you would just have to cut the stem off, right? So you'd have to dig into here and cut the stem off or peel the cap off. It's just a lot more labor intensive. With the rivet removal tool, I feel like it's so much safer and faster and easier. And you could use it on tubular rivets too. If you want to see that, I'll go ahead and remove this rivet here. So again, I want to find the hole here that best matches the diameter of the rivet that I'm removing. And this time, because it's a tubular rivet, I want the star shape face up and the rivet head face down. Okay. And then now that I've lined that up, I'm going to take the pin and stick it in the middle here. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit that with the mallet. So you could see there that this just fell out and pushed out, and that's it. And that removed that rivet. So you always want to make sure you work on a cutting board with this because you don't want to smash the pin punch into a hard surface and break it. Yeah, so that's how you remove rivets. If you didn't have a rivet removal tool, you would have to go in with pliers and actually snip off each of those little pieces of star shape. So I would really suggest using safety glasses for that. But this is like literally my favorite tool and I use it all the time because believe it or not, even though I know how to set rivets, I still make mistakes and it makes it a lot me less nervous to make mistakes because I know I have that tool to help. Okay. Oh, that's a great question, Christine. Thank you for asking. Why do you use a mallet instead of a hammer with a rivet setter? So in general, metal tools should be not hit with a metal hammer, right? For two reasons. One, you want to preserve your tool, so it will start to misshapen it over time. The second reason that's probably more important is the whole goal of setting or hitting something is to transfer your force, right, onto the tool to then smash the rivet. And you don't get a good force transfer from metal hammer to a metal tool. It actually bounces off. And so you have all this wasted effort. Whereas if you hit a metal tool with a mallet, then you get a really nice force transfer. Now, when you're setting a regular rivet, and you just want to set the rivet, it's okay that you hit it with a hammer because you don't have this intermediary tool in the way that's really taking up the force in that blow. You can just hit it directly onto the rivet itself. The other thing that's super important about hardware and especially tubular rivets is even if you're working on a hard surface, if your surface is on a bouncy table, then your rivet still won't set. So a lot of times people will go with their anvil or their piece of stone and they'll work on the ground to set rivets, or they'll put their stone on their kitchen counter because kitchen counters or countertops in general have way less bounce and they're way less hollow because the whole goal is to isolate the force of your blow onto the rivet to actually smash it. So if you're going to hit a rivet even on a hard surface and the table is bouncy, then it's just going to go like this on the table and it's not actually going to smash the rivet. So honestly, to me, that's the number one tip for setting rivets. And people have trouble if they don't work on non-bouncy tables. Like you really need to work on a stable hard surface and you really need to have some sort of stone or hard surface on top of your stable table. And so it's sort of this double thing. And once you get that, then you can just set rivets super easy. But if you're having a really hard time setting your rivets, you need to go onto a non-bouncy surface. Okay. What else do we have? So with tubular rivets, it's better to have just enough showing on the back rather than too long. And demonstrate the rotary cutter again. Okay, so yeah, if your tubular rivet is sticking up past a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch of your work, then it's going to be really long and it'll just be, the tube will make a long flower on the back. I don't know how to explain it. Like it will just be a very big, like this part here will just stick up more and you'll have to just hit it for longer because you'll have a longer tube that you have to smash into like the flower shape. So generally you want to match the length of the rivet stem or the length of the rivet to the bulk of your work so that it sticks out at least a 16th to an 1/8 of an inch. Terry is asking about pre-cut leather tabs. Yeah, so we sell pre-cut. So honestly, we have like a whole bag making supply shop on our website. So like it's really hard to find bag making materials, and I totally recognize that. So as I design bags and patterns, I just decided to sell all of the tools that are my favorite for bag making and all of the materials that are my favorite for bag making. So if you're making one of my patterns, you can get everything or even other people's patterns, you can usually get everything you need on our site, including all the tools that I use, because I totally scour the whole world for the best bag making tools and try to find them and offer them. So some things we sell you can't even get anywhere else in the US, because I've tried so hard to find like high quality materials and hardware. So yeah, all the stuff that we are working with are totally just on our website. You can find all of that, including the tabs and including packs of washers too. But if you wanted to make your own tabs, you would just use a rotary cutter on a mat and just make sure your rotary cutter is sharp. And you can totally cut leather with a rotary cutter. Would you recommend rivets for woven or crocheted straps? So if you put a rivet in a woven or a crocheted strap, you would have to really sandwich it between two pieces of leather, because it would probably just tear out super easy. Yeah, so it would depend on how weak or how loose the weave is, right? Because it's just a piece of metal that's cutting through something, so you would have to just really sandwich that between two pieces of leather. Oh yeah, someone had asked about the rotary punch. So all you do is squeeze it onto something. So if I have a piece of leather here and I want to make a hole, I usually use both hands and then squeeze it and it makes a hole. Okay, so you can make all different sized holes. There's a bigger hole with a larger barrel here. And this rotary punch is actually a hydraulic assist that I sourced from Germany, and it takes 70% less power to squeeze. So this is my favorite one to use. And again, we have that on our site. Okay, what else do you all want to know about? Teresa, yes, it is hard to find good rivets and closures. So it really depends on what type of closures you're looking for. Honestly, most of my time in the mornings is spent just researching and trying to find different hardware pieces and stuff, and trying to make sure I can bring in stuff that everyone really wants to use. So I would just dedicate some time to looking online and see what you come up with. A lot of times some hardware isn't available outside of commercial uses too. So like high-end bag designers that you'll find commercially, they often will have that hardware made especially for them in the factory when they're designing. But again, check our site if you want to see what we have for rivets and closures. Okay. What else would folks like to know? The name again of the tool used to set the tubular rivet. Yep. So this is called a tubular rivet peening tool. And I know it's a funny word, but it peens the end of the rivet. And you can look on our supply shop for that. Oh yeah, Belinda is asking about Chicago screws. Sure. Okay. So a Chicago screw is not a rivet, it's a screw. So a lot of times people are like, call them rivets, but they're actually screws. So a Chicago screw has two parts, but they are fasteners. So you can use them to fasten straps together. There's a cap end that receives the screw, and there's the side that has the screw, right? And so essentially you put whatever you want in between the two, and then you screw it shut, and then it fastens things. So let's go ahead and look at that. If you want to use a Chicago screw on you know, on a fabric or a piece of leather, you're going to want to make a hole that's the right size for the Chicago screw, which is a larger diameter than the one for a rivet. So let's go ahead and do that. So I like to use a 5/32 drive punch to punch a hole for my Chicago screw. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so I cut some holes in my fabric and 2 pieces of leather scrap that I'm just working with. The first thing I'm going to do is take the Chicago screw that has the side that doesn't have the screw and put that into the hole that I made in the piece of leather, right? So there's that. And then I'm going to take that and put it into the hole that I made in my fabric. And then I'm going to take my other piece of leather and sandwich it. Whoops, I'll do it this way. On top of my Chicago screw. Okay, and then I'm going to take my Chicago screw with the thread side and screw it in. Okay, and then I can take a flathead screwdriver and just tighten that. Now, sometimes when you tighten a Chicago screw, it continues to spin the back. I don't know if you guys could see that. So there's a tool called a Chicago screw tool that actually holds the back of the Chicago screw so that you can actually tighten the Sorry, I realized I am muted. So let me just repeat that. So this is a Chicago screw tool, and this is my Chicago screw. And I went ahead and tightened it as much as I could with a flathead screwdriver, but it's still spinning on the back. So in order to hold the back so that I can tighten this more, I'm going to use a Chicago screw tool. So I'm just going to go ahead and see there's rubber pieces there. I'm going to go ahead and squeeze this onto my Chicago screw, and it's kind of like pliers. And then I can reach into the middle of this here and tighten my Chicago screw. And what's happening is the back of the screw is being held by this piece of rubber so that it doesn't spin. And then I'll release this, and then I get it as tight as I could get it, which is easier than me trying to hold this side with my finger while I tighten this side. Then you can also, if you want, put a little Loctite, which is just like a screw thread glue, on the screws if you really want to make sure that you don't want this to come apart. So a Chicago screw, I would like to say it's not necessarily stronger than a rivet per se, because it's going to be as strong as you can screw it in, but it is a lot of times more easily removable than, so like a lot of times people use Chicago screws on belts if they switch out their belt buckles often. So you can just unscrew it and put your new belt buckle on your belt. I like to use Chicago screws on strap attachment points where I actually want the strap to be able to swivel a little bit. So we use it on the Fremont tote, which I don't know if some of you have taken that class on Craftsy, on the crossbody strap with the crossbody strap tabs, because that's a strap that sort of like swings with your body. So I just found that that's like a nicer fastener for that attachment point. If you have a thin leather, do you use an interface to stabilize before? I don't usually use thin leather to make straps. But if your thin leather is the body of the work that you're making, then you would probably want to sandwich your rivet attachment point between two pieces of thicker leather, so that it doesn't tear out through your thinner leather. I mean, that's sort of the theme here, is if you really want to make sure your rivet attachment point is strong, I would always sandwich it between two pieces of leather, either it be leather reinforcement or leather washers when you attach your strap. Oh, great, Kay, that sounds fun. So you made the Fremont bag. If you use the Craftsy class, there's a lesson in there that shows you how to draft the pattern. So you could always use that lesson to draft a smaller pattern. Yes, metal heavy duty snaps. So that would be something like these line 24 snaps. And we use those on our Slabtown backpack pattern. And they're great. You can set them with a line 24 snap hand setter and a dot anvil. We actually have a video too on our site where we sell those tools. Okay, so Paula's wondering about a magnetic snap closure. Okay, so that has its own setting tool also. So sometimes people ask me if you could use different tools for different, like, could you use a rivet setter on a magnetic snap setter? Like, technically, yes, but it doesn't quite set as well. But we can look at how you would set a magnetic snap rivet, as I think what you're asking is a magnetic snap rivet or a magnetic snap, which are two different things. So I can go, let me grab a magnetic snap. I forgot to bring one over, and I'll show you the difference between a magnetic snap rivet and a magnetic snap, because they're two different things. It's like, you all should see my table right here. There's like a million different hardwares. Okay. So people are probably pretty familiar with a magnetic snap because they've been around in the sewing world forever. Here is the snap, right? And it has these prongs, and then it has these washers, right? So that one is pretty straightforward. You just cut some holes in your fabric, stick this through, and stick the washer on the back. I'm going to focus on showing you all how to set a magnetic snap rivet, because those are not that common and a lot of people have never used them. So a magnetic snap rivet looks really similar to a magnetic snap, you know, so it has the magnetic snap part, but then on the back, instead of those two prongs, it has a rivet and a rivet cap. And so these are really cool to use because you can actually make it so that the back side of the rivet looks really finished, or of the magnetic snap looks like really finished like a rivet. So this will be the last piece of hardware that I'll demonstrate how to install. So I need some holes in my fabric first. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I put 2 holes, one for each side of the magnetic snap rivet. And the first thing that I'm going to do is just pick a side and stick the magnetic snap rivet into my fabric. Then I really like to put a washer on the back so that I can use up some of the rivet stem. Like we said, we want it to be sticking out a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to stick my rivet, the cap on. Right? So you can also put the washer on this side if you wanted. I'm just trying to take up part of the rivet stem. So I'll show you what that looks like. So I can do that, and I can just put it on there and then stick it on here and then put the cap on. So imagine that could be the outside of my pocket, which we do on our Maywood tote pack pattern. Now, in order to set this, I need my cutting board. And I also need my 2 anvils and this strike post. So this is a magnetic snap rivet setter, and it comes with 2 anvils and a strike post that has a concave side. And the 2 anvils correspond to the 2 different sides of the magnetic snap. So on this anvil, it actually has an indentation, and the magnetic snap has an outdent right there. And then that is the one you use when you're setting that side. And then this one, it has a little dent out there, and it receives this one, which has an indent. So I'm going to put that down. I'm going to put it on top of my cutting board here. And then I'm going to grab my concave strike post and put it on top of the cap. And I really need to hold it down firmly because it wants to slide around. So I'm going to stabilize that, mute it, and then go ahead and set that with a mouse. Okay, so then you can see that that is now set, and you know it's set when it doesn't quite move around or it's stable in there. And if for some reason it still rotates, you can go ahead and set it a little bit more. And then in order to set the other side, I would do the same thing, obviously making sure that I'm putting the magnetic snap in the correct side so that when it goes to close, it can reach itself, opposed to accidentally putting it like on this side, right? So that's something to always keep in mind. And then I'll show you that with the cap and the washer showing, because that can be an aesthetic choice there too. So then I'm going to grab this anvil here, put it on there, and the strike post here with the concave side face down on top of the cap. And then I went ahead and set that. Okay, and so then that is a magnetic snap rivet. So hopefully that was super informative. Those are really fun. They get this really nice, beautiful finish, which you don't get when you use regular magnetic snaps, because you have to deal with that washer and the 2 prongs, and you have to hide those in a hem usually. Okay, so let's see if there's any last minute questions before we sign off for the day. Martha's wondering about brands of rivets. So I would just recommend the ones that we sell, just because we have tested them and we like them a lot. As far as staying away from some, I don't know. It really depends on, what you're making and your uses. Generally, very old metal is not as strong. But, making bags and projects with metal hardware can be a lot of trial and error. So you need to develop your technique, and you should be using the right tools for the right job and working on a stable and hard surface. So like anything, like when you first started sewing and setting up your sewing studio, you sort of developed your sewing knowledge and your sewing tools at the same time, right? Like you probably didn't have the plethora of sewing tools that you have now. If you have a sewing practice that's robust, you built it up over time. And it's the same thing with hardware. There's so many different setters and so many different hardware, and it really requires building out your hardware and bag making studio to fully take advantage of all of the different ways of using hardware, which can be super fun too. Does your website just sell kits to make bags, or do you also sell the bags? Oh, that's a great question. Twice a year, we do sell sample bags that are finished, but my whole thing is, of course, teaching people how to make bags. So we tend to sell things that help people make bags, not necessarily the finished bag. Oh yeah, sew in magnetic snaps are great, Kate. They're just make sure you sew the correct size of the snaps to face each other, which I've made that mistake before where I've accidentally flipped the magnet and then it hasn't actually been the right side. Yeah, so just check that kind of stuff. Great. All right. It looks like We're good with questions. So thank you so much for joining me. And I hope that I have demystified hardware a little bit for you. And feel free to check out our site or email me info@clumhouse.com if you have any more questions. We have a ton of free YouTube videos on just different techniques. And I would say if you haven't taken the Fremont Tote class on Craftsy yet, it is phenomenal and super fun. And you get this really nice high-end looking bag afterward. And you can get kits on our site for that. If you're more of a beginner stitcher and you're just starting to dabble in bag making, then I would recommend the travel bag boxy woodland pouch on Craftsy as a class, because that's just to getting your feet wet, learning how to set rivets. But if you want more of a challenge or you're more of an experienced stitcher, then you should definitely make the Fremont Tote. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me today. And I hope you have a lovely day and so much fun making with all of the new skills that you learned today. Thanks.